Hi, I'm Bishop Todd Hunter. Welcome to the C4SO podcast. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the C4SO podcast. Today, my guest is a longtime friend, Duane Grobman. Duane's had a long career as a consultant, a mentor, working with leaders of all kinds and all situations. Duane's been an important confidant in my life and served officially as a coach for many years. And I'm so glad to bring him into this conversation today about how do we as individuals manage change and the feelings associated with it, and how as leaders do we help manage change in our various places of leadership. I'm really glad to introduce to you Duane Grobman. I was thinking this morning that you and I have a long history together as friends and otherwise for about 15 years, I think, 14, 15 years. But I was thinking along that same time, I think people should know about you. Now, what's the real deal? You have like partial season tickets to the Angels, like you and another family share them or something? I forget the story.
My father and I share them, and then we share them with two other friends.
So, okay, I knew it was shared.
Not many people can go to 81 games.
Yeah, that's true. You'd have to be pretty darn committed. So I was thinking we share this together. So the last World Series, 2002, the last time, I can't believe this, the Angels had a winning record, 2014. Trout's not played a full season in 5 years. We lost Ohtani to the Dodgers. I think something we share is sort of this earthly form of purgatory of being an Angels fan.
It is an exercise in the practice of long suffering.
Yeah, there you go. So you don't go to Angel games. You go to nurture the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, in my better moments.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, Duane, I would like people to get to know you a bit. You know, I guess we first met as you being a member of Holy Trinity in Costa Mesa, and then we became friends, and you served on the vestry and served the church in various ways. But give people a little bit of your background before we met each other in like 2009 or 10 or something at Holy Trinity.
Yeah. So, and actually, Todd and I, we didn't know each other. We grew up in neighboring towns.
We did, yes.
So we go back, that we didn't know each other at the time. But I give leadership to a nonprofit called TEND, T-E-N-D. And the name has a threefold meaning. It is a metaphor for how do we cultivate growth. Mm-hmm. Also an acronym for taking experience in new directions, which I think has relevance to today's topic.
Yeah.
And then it's also comes from John 21, when Jesus
tend
my sheep. And so we do 5 primary things. We do executive coaching, we do spiritual direction, we do consulting, and then we do qualitative research, particularly around the area of program evaluation. When organizations, institutions launch typically leadership development programs or spiritual programs, we're often brought in as an outsider to kind of evaluate, particularly funders who are often funding at significant levels and want to have an outside objective. Yeah. And then lastly, we publish a free monthly online magazine called Cultivari.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Which really seeks to support and encourage spiritual formation.
Yeah, spell Cultivari for our listeners.
It's CULTIVARE, and the address then is net at the end, .net.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really lovely. I would encourage everybody to check it out. So, Duane, if I was sitting on an airplane or in an elevator or something, and somebody said Duane Grobman, I mean, those are the kind of words I would use: coach, mentor, spiritual director. And because we're friends and because we've had overlapping engagements, sometimes you're engaging with me, sometimes you are helping us with leadership transitions at Holy Trinity. You've helped the diocese in many ways. So that's the way I would describe your work. And you've worn those various hats around me numerous times. And that's why we wanted you on the podcast today, to help us respond to the change that we're going through. So just to remind people who are listening and might not have heard the previous episode, is that C4SO is going through a change in that its founding bishop, me, Todd Hunter, is retiring next spring. And we have had an election for somebody to replace me. And it's that specific transition that I, of course, am trying to help C4SO go through. And so what I wanted to do today, Duane, is to get you to kind of call on all of your experience and all those hats of coach, mentor, spiritual director, consultant, all those things, and help us process this. So let's begin with, I know you and I from previous conversations have an appreciation for William Bridges and especially his work, his book called Transitions. So I wonder if you could just, if we could begin by you commenting on a quote from the last podcast where Bridges says, "It isn't the changes that do us in, it's the transitions." And that's interesting because you would think changes and transitions are synonymous, right? But he makes a difference here saying that change is situational. It's external. Something's happening. Transition, Bridges says, is the psychological process the psychological process that we go through to come to terms with the new situation. Bridges wants to say that change is external, transition is internal. What do you think about that?
Well, I previously read several of his books, and I'm a big fan of William Bridges.
Yeah.
And I use his work quite a bit, particularly in the coaching realm.
Yeah.
Also in consulting. So I really affirm his insights and perspective. I do think it's really helpful to help individuals and organizations understand the difference between change and transitions. I'm thinking with a quote on change that I learned when I was graduating from high school, which in and itself is a unique time of transition.
Yeah, very much, yeah.
From high school to college. But it was in my high school yearbook, and I thought, well, this is kind of profound for a high school yearbook. But Heraclides said there's nothing permanent except change.
Oh, yeah.
And that really got me thinking, even as a young 18-year-old. But thankfully, transition is not permanent. It's a process, and it's a period of time. And I think you're really wise to begin to help C4SO have some language to work with and a concept besides, well, it's a process.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot that takes place in this transition. And I did have the opportunity to listen to last week's, and I thought you did a great job in sort of outlining how Bridges defines transition as there's an ending.
Yeah.
There's the neutral zone, and then there's a beginning.
Yeah.
And I just find that really helpful language because transition can create for a whole host of people a lot of anxiety and dis-ease.
Yeah.
And I know you're trying to help the diocese eliminate any unnecessary anxiety so that people can approach it as trusting the unfolding plans of God.
Yeah. So let's role play here a little bit, Duane. I hadn't thought of this, but so I'm sitting with you and you've got one of your hats on, a director, mentor, coach. And I say something like, maybe I'm working at a university, maybe I'm working on a church staff, and I say, oh gosh, we're getting a new dean. So something's external. We're getting a new dean, like that's happening. Or, oh gosh, we're getting a new executive pastor and, I work for him. And someone says, it's not so much, or I say to you, it's not so much, Duane, that I mind that transition, but man, I got all kinds of feelings about it. What do I do about that? Why do my thoughts seem so separated from my feelings about something that seems perfectly rational?
Well, it is really common. It's a super common. I will say I'm not going to role play. I'll just respond.
Okay.
You don't know me in this context because I'm known for putting play and role play, and I think you want a more serious response.
Oh. Okay.
But I think helping people recognize that there is, and that again, Bridges is really helpful in that there, pay attention to what's going on inside and recognize that which is you think has external ramifications and implications, it also has internal. And much of what Bridges talks about, and I think it's really accurate, is you have to begin to ask yourself, what am I holding tightly to? And what might God be inviting me to kind of loosen my grip on?
Yeah.
And perhaps let go of.
Yeah.
Because the reality is the change does involve loss.
Mm-hmm.
All change involves loss. And so therefore it involves grief. It can involve lament. And it can stir some of our anxieties and fear.
Yeah.
So, but I usually find that helping people identify what are they holding so tightly.
Yeah.
I'm
really glad you brought that up. I don't think I brought that up the last episode, the issue of loss, or if I did, I'm not remembering, but that's super helpful because as you say, loss has all these other emotions that cohere to it.
It does.
Yeah. Well, sorry, go ahead.
People tend to want change. I mean, we all want change in our lives in particular areas. But what we usually don't want is loss. And unfortunately, change comes with loss.
Yeah, I'm kind of remembering, I haven't read Bridges in a lot of years, but I think I'm remembering him saying marriage is the loss of singleness, or high school graduation is the loss of those high school years. And that he was making your point that there's always some loss involved, and that's what triggers some of these feelings.
Yes. I mean, I think the good thing for those involved in C4SO and your broader listeners is that we're actually most of us, pretty experienced transitioners, because you just cited marriage. I talked about high school to college, the birth of a child, starting a new church or attending a new church, a job change, the loss of a loved one. And you mentioned in the last podcast, retirement. Yeah. All of those are forms of transitions.
Yeah.
And so
that's helpful.
We're already experienced at it. It's just when a new change occurs and we're engaged in a new transition, it does stir us afresh.
Yeah. Okay, Duane. So at this point in my life, if somebody were to ask me about my kind of primary spiritual focus or primary spiritual practice, I would say I would want to start talking about practicing the presence and Brother Lawrence and De Caussade, and that's just my go-to thing. I mean, there's lots of other things like prayer and scripture and worship and all that. But if I just think of what literally gets me through a day, connected to myself, connected to the people and events of my life, connected with God, it's scrupulously for many years now trying to practice the presence. And so I want to bring that to this conversation to help people, as you've already alluded to, pay attention to their own soul in this as a normal thing, that it or their own thoughts and feelings, emotions, that sort of thing. Just learning to be present to it. And you've already mentioned one of them is just being present to, why am I having a hard time letting go? What's the loss I fear? And instead of judging ourselves or judging each other or being hard on ourselves, to just literally sit with the Lord and wonder what's the attachment here. So I'm glad you brought that one up. Here's another one I'd like you to react to that I think I hear a lot. And that is when people are when we're in this liminal moment where we can feel that a loss is coming. And in this case, just to keep it real, Todd's going to be gone next May. But this new era isn't here. So we're in this liminal moment in which we wonder, like, well, who will I be in this new era? Or who will we be? Who will C4SO be in this new era after the change? It feels to me like that's a big thing that a lot of people have going on in their conscious or subconscious mind.
I agree. it's confronting the unknown.
Hmm.
It's confronting the unknown. But, one of the things that I like that you reminded people last month was the quote of Dallas Willard, that it's always in the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
But people are used to a particular leader in this case. They're used to a particular way of things sort of operating and unfolding, a way of communication. But they recognize right now that at some point is going to change. And the new leadership is going to have their own forms of communication and ways of being. And so there's that fear of what that unknown is.
Yeah.
But again, one reason I brought up all these that were experienced transitioners is been through a lot of transitions already.
Yeah.
And you've made it through. And in many ways, transition is the necessary process to lead us to where God wants us. And I find sometimes it's helpful to kind of, I think transition is the right word, but sometimes it's helpful to kind of reframe it and sort of, I like this quote about traveling, that a trip becomes a journey after you've lost your luggage. So, and in many ways, this transition is sort of a surrendering of certain luggage you may have from your.
Yeah. Or where'd my luggage go? Who took my luggage? Yeah. Yeah. What power in an executive suite or something took my luggage? Yeah. Yeah.
So, but if you can reframe it sort of as a journey or even an adventure in learning, because that's the other thing is with the loss, with the change, there is the requirement of learning. I have to get in the learning mode.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, you use that word particular, that I'm a particular person. I'm a particular kind of leader. And I want to say that particularness, though, does not mean perfect. And the people around me were finding their particularness within mine, but a new particularness is going to, be revealed in the next year or so. And you're giving me hope that we'll all find our particularity, including me, around a new leader, and that's just a part of the process.
Yes. One of the things that I liked that you said in the last episode, the last podcast, was that you are the foundational leader. You found it. But that it's time and God is leading to what the next chapter is. And again, that shouldn't be viewed as something that's fearful or scary, but it should be viewed as something that God is inviting us to, and that He has good things planned for us.
Yeah.
And it may even be that, one of the things I liked also that you brought in, that Bridges talks about, that the neutral zone, which that often gets people sort of stuck because there's the vulnerability of going back to the way things were. And I want to do that. So that's one vulnerability. The other vulnerability is to, out of the sort of uncomfortableness or dis-ease, kind of rush forward and just force.
Yes.
New. And that doesn't work well. And we live in a culture that's very immediacy. So things take sort of longer. They don't unfold always so positive. Well, they take longer, have more of a richness to it. And so it's going to take some time, but to trust it. But it may be that going from the founding stage, it may be that God wants to do something that's renewing, something new in C4SO. And again, Bridges, since you sort of brought it up in your last one, there's a quote of his that I liked where he says, renewal is possible only by going into and through transition.
Yeah.
And transition always has at least as much to do with what we let go of as it is as with whatever we end up gaining in its place. So it's this beautiful twofold.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me want to say if you're really tracking with these last couple of episodes and you are a leader and you are, especially if you're leading change right now or going through it, you should just get Bridges' book, Transitions. Because Duane, you just gave me a flashback. I mean, I forget when the book came out, but I feel like it's been a couple decades since I was working with it. And I remember creating talks out of it and stuff. But you just gave me a flashback to, I remember reading that section of the neutral zone because I'm the kind of person who would want to rush forward, because I'm creative and I like new things, but it's not just this virtuous, I'm creative and like new things. I also don't like the unsettled feelings associated with liminality. So my personality would be, let's rush ahead. And to your point, that's in an organization is as harmful as trying to hold on to the old.
Correct. And there may be something new that's there. I often with coaching clients will use the example of, I'm a music lover, so I have great appreciation for the composer John Williams.
Yeah.
Most people may or may not recall that in 1980 he became the composer of the Boston Pops after Arthur Fiedler, who was this longtime leader there. And I think John Williams is an extraordinary human being and composer, but he took actually a long chunk of time before he imposed a change he wanted, which was to have the Boston Pops play movie music, which and they basically he basically had a mutiny on his hands, and he actually resigned because he felt so strongly about it. And then the board had to step in, and they brought about the change. And I don't know about you, but one of my favorite things is to go to the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
Do a John Williams night where they do a whole mix of his movies.
I've never done that, but it sounds amazing.
It is amazing. So they basically, the orchestra had to change. They had this new leader because he was introducing new music. And music that actually the audience greatly appreciated and had strong affection for.
Yeah, super helpful. Okay, we have two other main points I want to get to, but one other one on this issue of paying attention to our own soul. You know, I've been leading almost 50 years. I've been watching leaders for 50 years. And I know one of the patterns I see during these liminal moments is a temptation to controlling behaviors, either a leader trying to control people or the environment, or the people for whom a change is something that's coming at them. They have a different set of controlling sort of impulses that might come up. But let's focus here on what would you say to a leader who their kind of first emotional reaction to this is to become controlling. Like there's, in change, everything's changing, and that pushes a button in me that I want to be in control. What do you think?
Again, I go back to that question. What are you holding so tightly to?
Okay.
What are you holding so tightly to? There's something there that I'm holding tightly that I'm afraid of letting go, or I'm afraid if I don't hold it, things are actually going to get out of control. So again, what am I holding so tightly? Sometimes that's a value, a perspective. Sometimes it's a fear because of their past histories and certain changes and transitions haven't gone so positively.
Yeah.
So I think, what am I holding so tightly?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. Yep. Okay, so let's shift gears here, Duane, to now I'm picturing a rector or somebody leading anything. It could be youth or whatever, who a change is happening in an organization. And so a part of what they have to do is not only deal with their own inner life, but to help others with their inner life and the relational dynamics that get produced when you have a change of leadership. So I'm thinking of somebody who's trying to lead a team, a vestry, a parish council, a board, or whatever. Give us a couple quick thoughts about noticing the relational and inner dynamics of the people we're trying to lead, not just our own.
Well, I always think that listening is always the first activity you need to exercise. And, we listen with our eyes and our ears, our heart. And so listening to your people, I'm recalling when you were sort of in the midst of transitioning from Holy Trinity to C4SO and being the bishop full time. I don't know if you recall, but we held listening groups, and those were really valuable to listen to people. And so I think listening is one of the first. It's sort of maybe discounted, but it's super important. You need to listen because you're going to be listening to where people are at emotionally and spiritually, and again, what they may be holding on to tightly.
Good. All right. So I don't really love this language of stakeholder, but for lack of better language, or I don't know, key issues in the process. So we've talked about a leader being attentive to their own soul, non-judgmentally, no guilt, no shame, just being attentive. We've talked a bit here about trying to help others. And then I thought, Duane, there's the change sought. Like if we were in A and we're in this liminal moment where we're not quite in B, whatever B is a good. And so that we can't merely be attentive to our own souls, and we can't merely be attentive to caring for the souls of the people we care about in leadership and in the congregation, but there's also the change, and it needs attention too, right? Like we're actually trying to do something that we assume is good. So how do we hold that intention? Like that feels sort of material, again, for lack of a better word, where the other things we've been talking about are, kind of soul and emotion and mind, heart, will. But we do have to hold on to, we're trying to build this building, or, we need somebody new to run the children's ministry and we have to hire this person. So there's that thing as well that feels concrete. So how do you coach people into holding on to that within all these other inner and relational dynamics?
So, and this does connect to the listening, but one of the things that I usually do is help people identify the specifics that they're holding on to, and that could be in the material realm, the buildings, the facilities, certain programs, but then prioritize them and dig deeper into why you hold those in such, high regard, or you see them as so instrumental for the future of the church.
Yeah.
And again, I'm recalling some conversations we had when I was at Holy Trinity, because one of the things that I gave voice to is, at least at that stage in the life of that church, one of the things that we voiced is that we were not going to program our way to our future.
Yeah.
But it was going to be done through relationships. And so again, if you kind of prioritize what is most important, things tend to sort of, and get people to buy into that and understand those priorities, then I think things unfold in a more healthy, natural way.
Now, if we were having a session together and you were coaching me, I would be saying back to you, Duane, I think I hear you saying that the way to pay attention to, again, for lack of a better word, the material thing, is to pay attention to myself and others, and that's not opposite to pursuing that. It's actually the way to pursue it.
Correct. Yep.
This is why you and I have always gotten along. I can hear you. All right. So, Duane, you might remember the last couple of thoughts on my earlier podcast was suggesting the kind of self-examination that we've been talking about, and trying to be present to our truest thoughts and feelings, and just processing them as they come up with the Lord, and with the help of others, as we're kind of modeling here. So I'm wondering, sort of rapid fire, if you could just comment on these tips that I suggested at the last episode. So just this notion of being especially attentive in eras of change.
I totally agree with your whole list, but
okay.
I would say yes. Be aware and attentive to that there are areas of change. And I go back to what I said earlier. We actually are all pretty experienced transitioners. We've experienced a lot of change in our life.
Well, actually, I hear you saying something else that's really helpful, Duane. Now I do feel like we are in a coaching session. That being attentive to myself is what helps me be attentive to others. And it gives it kind of a practical undertone or overtone rather than one that's guilt and shame, good or bad, right or wrong. I'm just being attentive. And then that allows me to be attentive to others because I'm settled in my own soul. I'm not going into these hard conversations as an anxious presence, to get to one of our other favorite authors. But that we'll tackle Friedman another day. All right. So I've basically already said it, but again, say whatever you want about the importance of being non-judgmental of ourselves or others in these processes.
No, I really affirm that. Yeah, as we know, judgment tends to shut people down.
Including ourselves, right?
In ourselves. And so we need to be non-judgmental so we can open people up and understand what they're thinking, feeling, experiencing. Because again, if you go back to all change involves loss, it may be at a very early stage in their own sort of lamenting and grief, where you may be at a different stage in your grieving process of that which you've lost.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we got to do a little Friedman, because the next tip I gave was about being non-anxious. So anybody who's around me has heard those words for 15 years. But for other people, it's like, well, what does that even mean? So what do we mean when we suggest that a leader, as we're leading people through these liminal processes, should be non-anxious? What is that? Like, what's that look like?
Well, for some reason, all of a sudden, the British phrase, keep calm and carry on.
Okay. Yeah.
The reality is when you're with an anxious person, and that can be an anxious leader, it just has this ability to kind of be contagious, and it creates that anxiety in those that are in relationship to it. And so it's really helpful for the leader to remain calm, to be attuned to his or her own interior life. And from that, do the work that enables you to think clearly and to trust. So much of the work I do is helping people actually trust their instincts, trust their feelings, trust their gut. And then first and foremost, trust God.
Yeah.
That he's in control of this. And so therefore you don't have to, again, hold things tightly or try to control things. Because often the holding things tightly is an example or an expression of anxiety.
Yeah. Again, if we were having a session, I would be saying back to you, what that says to me is noticing my own formation in Christ, finding a settledness and a security, a kind of a firm stance in him, taking on, as you said earlier, the notion that we're always safe in the kingdom of God. That's what allows me to be non-anxious. Like, I can't gruntingly be non-anxious. Something like non-anxious is an overflow of a certain sort of heart. And then I hear you saying, if I can show up to life that way, and if I can show up to leadership that way, that also overflows. It's not just anxiousness that overflows, but non-anxiety can overflow as well. Am I hearing you?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why I think your list is excellent. Practicing God's presence, and the word I would keep coming back to is trust. And for me, a quote that really was helpful to me in various transitions, because I do think it comes down to, am I trusting God? Am I trusting this situation? Am I trusting myself, those that I am journeying with? And another book that I found helpful for transitions is Brennan Manning's book, Ruthless Trust.
Yes.
And so he has a great definition of trust where he says, the way of trust is a movement into obscurity, into the undefined, into ambiguity, not into some predetermined, clearly delineated plan for the future. The next step discloses itself only out of a discernment of God acting in the desert of the present moment. The reality of naked trust is the life of a pilgrim who leaves what is nailed down, obvious and secure, and walks into the unknown without any rational explanation to justify the decision or guarantee the future. Why? And this is the key phrase, because God has signaled the movement and offered it his presence and his promise. To me, that's a great definition of
Thank you, Duane.
We have God's presence and promise to lead forward.
So, Duane, if I'm remembering right, you and I both have some affection for John O'Donohue, the poet. In fact, you might have been one of the people who helped introduce me to him. And gosh, I lose track of time, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, my spiritual director gave me his poem, For a New Beginning. And I thought of it just because it maps on a little bit, to Bridges' work. And I wonder, would you just read this stanza over us today as we close as like a blessing to C4SO as an organization, to each of our clergy and all of our lay leaders and congregations? You might want to say something about it if it's been a meaningful poem to you. I've been sitting with it for years, not knowing that this particular day would come, but it's been meaningful to me for a long time. Have you been aware of it?
I have, yeah. I greatly appreciate the work of John O'Donohue.
So. Yeah. Could you read this over us as kind of a final blessing?
My privilege. Thank you, Todd. For a New Beginning by John O'Donohue. Though your destination is not yet clear, you can trust the promise of this opening. Unfurl yourself into the grace of beginning. Awaken your spirit to adventure. Hold nothing back. Learn to find ease in risk. Soon you will home in a new rhythm.
Thank you, Duane. You've been a great guest, and I'm glad I finally get to introduce somebody who's very important and treasured in my life like you are to a bunch of my friends. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Thanks for listening to the C4SO podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and tell a friend. And leave us a review. It helps us spread the word. Grace and peace.